Hello, and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Carolyn, and I'm a nutrition student at the University of Guelph. Today, I'll be making a spiced apple cake recipe from a 1936 5-rose flour ephemera recipe booklet. This recipe consists of 2 parts, the cake itself and a frosting recipe. It also uses a thick applesauce, so I thought I'd make my own. That's what I'm doing here now, as you can see. I've washed, peeled, and chopped my apples, and now I'm putting them in a pot with water to boil. I added a sprinkle of cinnamon just for some extra flavor. Now I'm leaving it to simmer before coming back to add 1 cup of granulated sugar. Usually when I make applesauce I don't add sugar, but since I was using this for a cake recipe, I really wanted to make sure you could taste the sweetness. It's likely at the time this recipe was distributed in the 1930s that sugar may not have been used in applesauce, as granulated sugar was likely not something commonly accessible in some families. But I'm using it here because I have a big sweet tooth. Now that the apples have softened, I'm using a potato masher to break them up. And I've got chunky, thick applesauce that I'm happy with. I'm separating out a cup of applesauce for this recipe to cool in the fridge, and the rest I snacked on while making the cake. Okay, getting to the cake itself. I'm starting by creaming half a cup of shortening in a large bowl. It's interesting that shortening was used instead of butter, and it speaks to the economical context at the time of this recipe's creation. Next, I'm sifting 1.5 cups of brown sugar. I found that I had to press the sugar through my sift with the back of a spoon. Now that I've got the sugar measured, I'm going to gradually beat half of this sugar in with the shortening. Okay, now I'm taking a separate bowl and beating an egg. I'm going to beat the rest of the brown sugar in with this egg. Now, I'm combining the egg and sugar mixture with the shortening and sugar mixture. What's interesting is that this recipe refers to the shortening and sugar mixture as a butter mixture, and this kind of goes to show how shortening is used to replace butter in this recipe, likely due to the economic hardships at this time. We're using 5 roses flour for this recipe, as it calls for it directly. I'm combining the raisins and walnuts before flouring this mixture, but I'm making sure to sift the flour before measuring it. Sifting flour is important as flour can compact over time due to the weight of flour itself. Sifting makes sure that you can get equal, level flour measurements each time, and is something that the cook booklet mentions to do. It also mentions to get level measurements, which I'm using the back of a knife to do here. Looks pretty level to me. Now, I'm coating the raisin and walnut mixture in a 1/4 cup of flour, and this is to help them to stick to the cake mixture and prevents them from sinking in the pan. I'm adding the coated raisins and nuts to the batter so far, and mixing it all in. Here, I'm measuring out my dry ingredients. This recipe calls for half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and half a teaspoon of allspice. I sifted that together with a 1.5 cups of 5 roses flour, and here I'm adding a bit of the dry ingredients to the batter before mixing. It got quite difficult to mix using a spatula, so I switched back here to my beater. Now, I'm adding in a bit of applesauce I made, and mixing it with the rest of the batter. I'm going to go back in with the dry ingredients now, and I'm going to keep going back and forth between this and the applesauce until they're both fully added and we have our batter. Again, I found the batter to be a bit difficult to mix, so it must have taken some muscle before electronic hand mixers. Now that we've got our batter finished, I'm greasing my baking pan using cooking spray before adding in our cake batter. I have a springform pan too, so I have parchment paper to make sure no batter leaks out. I'm spreading the batter to make sure it's even. Here's a close-up, and now she's going in the oven. I'm using a makeshift double boiler here using a steamer and a metal bowl, and I'm getting started on the icing recipe by adding 1 scant cup of brown sugar, a sprinkle of salt, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar. Now I'm adding 1/3 of a cup of boiling water, an egg white, and beating. This recipe also mentions that you can use coffee here instead of water for a different flavor. It mentions too to use a rotary egg beater to mix the icing. My parents actually have a rotary egg beater, but unfortunately they live 5 hours away, so I wasn't able to get it for this video. This recipe boasts too that this icing should only take 7 minutes. Still, 7 minutes seems like a lot if you're using a rotary beater. I know my arms were getting tired just holding an electric beater. Okay, here's my icing after about 7 minutes. I kept beating for another 5 minutes until I got some stiffer peaks here. This icing is similar to a Swiss meringue buttercream, so I really should have waited to make it until the cake was finished and completely cool, but it all worked out okay and my icing didn't set too much before the cake was ready. Usually a Swiss meringue buttercream uses 4 egg whites, so this recipe only using 1 egg white again speaks to the economic period at the time. I'm adding vanilla to the icing recipe now that it's done, and I'm measuring with the hearts since there's no measurement on the recipe. Here's our finished cake after an hour and 15 minutes baking at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm removing the spring form and the parchment paper before icing this bad boy. Now let's taste test. Slicing into it, everything looks good. Visually, everything looks appealing. Getting it on the plate, it all looks nice. Let's have a bite. I'll say, it tasted pretty similar to a carrot cake. Now, let's see what my roommate Tian thinks. She liked it. Okay, now I'm gonna have my friend Chloe try it. And she likes it too. Thanks for watching, guys. A taste of history.